Welcome back. Using our newfound knowledge of loops, we're going to make our Facebook app a little bit better. Because Facebook has more than one user, right? It's not just one user, it's got millions of them. So how can we check somebody's password by going through not just one user, but multiple ones? Well, sounds like a perfect solution for loops. So let's give it a go. I'm going to add a few more users in here. Let me just copy this. And we'll have Sally with the password 123. And we'll also have Ingrid with password 777. So let's refresh that. I'm going to make this on a new line just so you can see it. I'm going to refresh. And let's type in Ingrid 777. Sorry, wrong username and password. And that makes sense, right? Because when we created our sign-in function, well, it's only checking the first item in the database. But we want to check through all of them. We want to check through the first item in the array, the second, and the third. Looks like we need to add a loop in here. So how can we do that? We should, add a for loop. I'm going to say in here, I'm going to comment this out first. And we'll say that when we sign in, we want to do for variable I equals 0. We remember this syntax from last video. We'll say I is less than the database dot length. So database length, that's 3. And we'll increment I every time. Open and close brackets. And then here we want to say if database I, so instead of 0 now, we can say I because I is going to go 0, 1, 2. So if database I equals, and we should add username here as well. So if the username equals the username that we receive, which is the input username, and I'm going to start a new line here, database I dot password equals the password that we receive from the user. Well, if that's the case, what should we do? Well, if that's correct, we'll do console log newsfeed. Otherwise, we'll do alert. Sorry, wrong username and password. So now I'm going to save. Let's try this out. Username, Ingrid, password 777. Sorry, wrong username and password. Sorry, wrong username and password. But then I get the newsfeed. What just happened? Well, what we just did was we did a for loop, but we ran this 3 times. So the first time I got sorry, wrong username. The second time I got sorry, wrong username because it's checking Andre, then Sally, and then it's checking Ingrid, which finally works and gives me back the newsfeed. So our logic here isn't right. What can we do to solve this? Well, I have an idea. Let's create another function. I'm going to call this function isUserValid. And this function is going to receive username and password. And here we can copy this and move it over here. But we don't really want to do what happened here where we constantly log. Instead, we would want to say return true. So if user is valid, return true. If the user is not valid, then we should return false, right? But how can we do that? Well, if I do return false here, let's look at the logic. I am looping through everything, if at any point the username and the password match with what we have in the database, return true. And we remember that a function stops and exits when it sees return. So it's going to return true. But if it does the looping 3 times and this if condition never passes, it's going to go to the next line, which is return false. So now, is user valid? Well, let's test this out. I'm going to say console.log is user valid, and we'll give it username and password. And you can see that the username and password is coming from here. So let's see. I'm going to save and refresh. Ingrid 777. True. That's right. Let's test something where it's not right. I'm going to say da and garble. False. Okay, it looks like our isUserValid function is working. So now, watch this. We can remove the log and uncomment our original function. And instead of doing all this check, we can now say if is user valid, username and password, which is again this username and password that we receive over here from the prompt. If this is true, then run the newsfeed. If it's false, well, else you say, sorry, wrong username and password. Let's save and refresh. Okay, let's go Ingrid, password 777. We get our newsfeed. And if we enter a wrong information, we get, sorry, wrong username and password. How cool is that? We now just created 2 functions, and it reads pretty nicely, right? It says sign in, here's the username, here's the password. We go to the sign in function, it says, hey, if is user valid, yes, user is valid, then blog newsfeed. Otherwise, alert, sorry, wrong username and password. And that is a really important concept of naming things and ordering code so you can kind of read it like English and it makes sense. And there you have it. We have our Facebook app. You can see here the power of JavaScript. Again, we've created these functionalities that can be applied on grander scale on real web apps. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.